So today we're going to talk about the peer-reviewed terminology standard that was published in July of this year. We have 4 speakers. Myself, I am from STM Solutions, and STM has been working on this standard together with NISO. So Nettie Lagas from NISO will speak. Then we have 2 members of the working groups that have been the working group that has been working on this standard. Anna Jester from eJournal Press will talk a bit about the terminology itself, and then we have Kim Eggleton from IOP Publishing. She will talk about her experience with implementing the terminology at her journals. But first, I give the word to Nettie.
Great, thank you, Joris. Hi, everyone. Very happy to be here to talk about this interesting, exciting standard. So I get the fun job of just starting off about what is NISO. NISO is an acronym. It stands for the National Information Standards Organization. In basic terms, we are a nonprofit. You could call us an industry trade association. We are accredited by the American National Standards Institute, and we are a member-based organization. Our mission is to develop and maintain technical standards for this industry, for the information industry. So anyone in libraries, publishers, that kind of interchange, I hope is interested in the work we do. Something to highlight is that we are volunteer driven. So we have a very small staff at NISO itself, and all of the work that you see associated with the standards and recommended practices that we publish is created by the volunteers such as Joris, Anna, and Kim. And they're all over the world. So we are US based, but I think our standards have quite an impact internationally. Next slide. So as I said, we create, publish, and maintain standards and recommended practices, 2 kinds of documents. But not only that, of course, once you create something, you need to support it. So we do foster the adoption of these things. And I think you'll see this webinar as part of that, but you'll see more work coming in the future on this particular standard, and continue to educate the community on these issues, as well as cultivate the next generation, what's coming, and how can we move in the right direction for the benefit of everyone. As I mentioned, we are a member-based organization made up of different types of organizations, libraries, publishers, and all of their affiliated organizations. And I like to think that standards grease the wheels, so they allow the different types of organizations with different perspectives to connect to each other and exchange information. Next slide. So what is a standard? A standard in its very essence is just an agreed upon way of doing something. And I think at a high level, standards are really effective at connecting, as I said, different types of organizations, promoting knowledge exchange, and therefore building communities. So you talk to each other, you find out about each other, and you create some connections and publish that. Standards also streamline processes. So when people are doing something the same way, that increases efficiency in their organizations and across the industry. The basics, once the basics are taken care of through standards, companies can then further innovate on top of the standards and provide differentiating pieces of their work. And I think something that managers also always like to hear is standards do reduce costs. When someone is doing something the same way, it provides a leg up for their further work. And ultimately, standards, when they are consistent, create confidence, and then foster trust across the industry, which I think in our industry is really important, and it's an important thing for the world as well. So that's my shtick on standards. Thank you.
Yes, then very quickly about STM. So STM is the Global Association of Scientific, Technical, Medical Publishers. We, our members, publish around 2/3 of articles worldwide, and also many books. And our mission is to advance trusted research, which has very much to do with the topic we're going to talk about today. So before we go into the background of the terminology, I would like to start with a poll. And hopefully you will see the poll. Yes. The question is, in his seminal article on open peer review, Tony Ross Hellauer collected how many different definitions of open peer review? So how many different meanings of open peer review did Tony collect in his article? And I'll give you, let's say, 20 seconds. All right, I think we are at 70%, so I'll give you a few more seconds. Let's try to hit 75%. Yes, very good, excellent. All right, well, I see the results here. So 61% said 32, 21% said 12, and 18% said 122. But actually, it is 122. So here you are immediately the reasons why we developed this terminology. In total, 122 different meanings were given to the word open peer review. And of course, a lot of innovation in open peer review happened, especially when our workflow started to be online, which is fantastic. But at the same time, it led to confusion, because when you talk about open peer review, it can mean many, many different things. So that is the first reason why we create this project, is to create consistency in the way we talk about peer review. The second reason why we started this project is open science. So besides being consistent about talking about review, we also want to be transparent about peer review. The terminology we created is not about favoring one model over the other, because we understand there will be a variety of models that are optimal for specific subject areas, etc. But at least we have to be transparent about the models that are being used. So when an author considers submitting a manuscript at a journal, he or she should be able to see immediately what kind of review is being used for the journal. And when a user reads an article, he or she should be able to see what kind of review that article has been given. And that, again, all in a consistent and clear way. So that is the reason why we started this project, and the project goes back to 2020. Then STM started a working group to create what we call then a peer review taxonomy. That project was finalized in July of 2021. We have done some first pilots. Then a NISO came on board, and we decided to make it a NISO standard. Then a new working group was starting, and you see the members here. Again, many thanks for all the contributors to this project. And the project was finalized in July of this year, so after 2.5 years. And today we're happy to present you the terminology. And I'll give the word to Anna to explain what it entails.
Thank you so much, Troy. So, as you can imagine, the working group got together and kindly, Nettie, following what STM had done as well, helped make sure that all of us had a chance to really talk about things. And as Doris mentioned, it used to be considered the taxonomy. So every word here has probably been thought of quite a lot. The other thing I would note is I strongly recommend that you volunteer to participate in a working group if it's in your specialty as well. You'll really learn a lot. And really be able to help define things for people and your organization and self. So we really found 4 pillars that were really part of what we felt this terminology should include. And the first one is identity transparency. The second one involves who do the reviewer or reviewers interact with. The third one is what review information is published. And the fourth is post-publication commenting. And I would note too, you can see this graphic here. It is widely available and not just as a background image as well. But let's talk a little bit more about what those are. So next slide, please. So what do we mean by identity transparency? So you can see the 4 that we've identified here. And the first one would be all identities visible. So in this, certainly the reviewers know who authors know who the reviewers are, and editors who are making decisions know who everyone is as well. And then after that, you can see what we might consider the more standard types of peer review historically. So single anonymized, double anonymized, or triple anonymized. And you'll notice it is not anonymous. Anonymous might just happen, right? Anonymized is intentional. So certainly we want to note if something is single anonymized, the reviewer identity is not made visible to the author. If it's double anonymized, reviewers and authors do not know who each other are. And then if it's triple anonymized, even the decision-making editors would not necessarily know who the other people involved in the process are. All right, next slide. The next pillar is, who does the reviewer interact with? So historically, it would be pretty common for reviewers not to know even who each other were. If you can imagine, years ago, people would actually mail manuscripts out for peer review to peer reviewers who would then do the peer review. They would mail it back to the editor would see everything, and so on. The internet has enabled a lot of things, including some positive things, as we know, including allowing reviewers to interact even with each other. So it's really important to know whether or not the reviewers interact, of course, just with the editor, or if they also can interact with other reviewers, or even with the authors, which is definitely, a much more collaborative type of process as well. So in each of these cases, I would just note, it's possible that the same journal might allow different manuscript types or authors to opt in to different kinds of review processes as well. So it's important to note that this could vary, and none of these has to be, specifically only because of this particular article type. All right, next slide. And review information published is the next pillar. So this is an interesting one. Historically, we might have seen none, right? You might have never even seen the reviews ever, which would also make sense if you were printing the journal, because it costs money to print things. So you might not have included those. But the others, you can see things like reviewer summaries. So a summary, it's a pretty broad word. It could be something as simple as 3 reviewers reviewed this paper, or a much more detailed summary, right? The same with reviewer reports, which would literally be those comments that came back from the reviewers. You might also have options where only those are included only if the author opts in to allow those to be published, or only if the reviewers have opted in to allow those to be published, as well as things like the submitted manuscript. And again, you might have the option where only the submitted manuscript is included if the author has opted in, as well as things like author and editor communication, the actual identities of the reviewers, or again, only if reviewers have opted in, show the reviewer identities, and then editor identities as well. So certainly a lot of options there. And again, those might vary based on a specific journal or even a specific manuscript type. So important to show them at the article level. All right, next slide, please. And then post-publication commenting. I've joked for a long time that there are 2 types of people. There are people who read the comments, and there are people who do not. But hopefully, if these are post-publication comments, these are worth actually reading, worth your time as well. And it's important to note that we have 2 types listed here: open or on invitation. So open commenting could be open to anybody, and it might be anonymous, or ideally, perhaps in my view, ideally, you'd be logged in with your ORCID, and we were actually going to know who you are that's made this comment as well. And then the other type would be on invitation. So very similarly to what we might have all thought of, would you like to respond to this letter to the editor? An editor might invite someone to actually make comments specifically on an article. All right, next slide, please. And then last for me, perhaps, but not necessarily least, use of the terminology. So it's all well and great to have a tool, but if you don't use it, it's just going to sit there, right? So please do not just leave this hanging out on a shelf in your garage or wherever else you put tools. Please do actually use it. And there are certainly places where we recommend that you use it, but things like, if you are legitimately going to be even doing just a pilot of this or using it as well, make sure the identity transparency information is noted both in your author guide or instructions for authors, or whatever the cool name is that you call those, as well as on the article page, so that people can see, aha, yes, identity transparency was used for this article in this way. The same for who the reviewer has interacted with. Please make sure that's both in your author guide as well as on the individual article page as well. And then simultaneously, the review information that is published or the post-publication commenting, you definitely want to be including that information in your author instructions. Make sure authors are aware. That's the whole point of it being open and available and people knowing what the process will be and hopefully choosing what meets their preferences. You might not need to put that information as much on the article page since, of course, whatever review information is published will literally be right there, as will the post-publication comments. So with that, I will hand off.
Thank you. That was very clear. And now we go to the next speaker to talk about experience with actually implementing the terminology on her journals. Kim.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. So my name's Kim Eggleton. I'm from the Institute of Physics Publishing, and we have been, well, we were involved in the trial of this, which we started a good year and a half ago now, where we at IOP put this description on 5 of our journals. So this is what we used to have back pre-pilot. It was very descriptive. It was text heavy, and it wasn't that easy to navigate, especially if your first language wasn't English. Links clicking through to explain maybe what some terms mean, but not all terms mean. And then when we joined the STM pilot, we moved to, next slide, please. Thank you, to this. So this is what we had up during the pilot. So we explained exactly what this description was and why we changed it. And then we had, just as Anna showed, that example of the bullet points. So the journal that this screenshot was taken from runs a double anonymous peer review process. The reviewers only interact with the editor, nobody else. The review information published, we didn't do a very good job of implementing the terminology in this case. We carried on using our own IOP specific language, so rap on the knuckles for us. We didn't describe particularly accurately what review information was published. Instead, we carried on with our own language and linked through to an explainer. This journal doesn't have any kind of post-publication commenting either. So a slightly fudged attempt, I would say. I think we have to hold our hands up, but I'm pleased to say now that the pilot has closed and we are putting this out onto all our journals now. Next slide, please. This is what we are now rolling out across all our titles. So for IOP, this is all our proprietary titles. Journals that we publish on behalf of some societies haven't all yet agreed to make these changes. So that's being done slightly more iteratively. But for the journals that we own, these changes are being rolled out across the board. And so you can see here that we've just changed the top linking through to the full terminology. We've got the bullet points correctly displayed, and then we've also got links for further information as well. One of the pieces of feedback that we did get, though, was that some of the terms still weren't that clear, and of course the whole project was hopefully going to remove that, and of course people can go through and link to the terminology. But one thing we've been discussing in-house just recently is whether we want to move from a text-heavy section on our journal websites to more of a visual example, which would actually lend itself more to the terminology and perhaps be a little bit easier to read. So Joris, if you can click onto the next slide, please. This is a horrible PowerPoint version, but of something that we might do, so that we're actually including the descriptor on the website as well, so that people can be exactly sure of what we mean. And it might mean that we don't need to update as frequently either if we just have a bank of images that we can apply across a number of different titles. We've also got some challenges within our portfolio, as I'm sure many different publishers do, and that not every journal is the same. Some of our journals, for example, allow authors to choose whether the article would be reviewed through single anonymous or double anonymous peer review. Some of our journals display review reports, others don't. So there isn't kind of a one size fits all for us. We need to go through and actively kind of make choices at each journal level about which image or descriptor is going to be displayed. So that's where we're up to in terms of implementation at the journal level. I would just add at the article level, while the group hasn't really made a huge amount of progress in actually implementing the standards at the article level yet, we have been doing some work in the background at IOP Publishing. So when we go through now to an article, we can already surface information like identity transparency. That work's been done in the background for us to turn on as and when this group is ready to make those recommendations. The same with, I think it's the number of reviewers that have seen the report as well is also something that we have ready in the, we call the content model in the background, so ready to be surfaced, but of course more work to do to implement the standard fully. So that's where we're up to at IOP. It's been a reasonably smooth and straightforward journey for us. We've had to involve a very small number of people really in terms of actually making the changes, but everybody that we've spoken to has completely been on board with why we've been making the changes. Lovely to have the reassurance of other publishers and other stakeholders feeding into the terminology that's being selected as well. So there's some reassurance there. So it's been a reasonably straightforward and painless implementation. Glad to report.
Thank you, Kim, for sharing your experiences. A few remarks before I would like to do another poll. The first remark is this has been a long journey with not only publishers, but a wider group of stakeholders in the ecosystem defining the terminology. It is focused on journal material, but we do intend to extend that to other research objects as well. Second, terminology. Our aim was to cover 98% of the review models available. There will always be exceptions that do not fit the model, so we had to find a balance here. And second, the focus now is going to be on the implementation. And the first test, we're doing the implementation on journal level. Again, the guide for authors, they are relatively easy to adapt. But the mission really is to have the terminology also describing the review models of individual articles on the article level. Technically, that's more challenging because we have to change our publishing systems, but it's definitely on the roadmap. So as the big challenges are ahead, we continue as the working group and we will come with a plan in the next few months about the next steps where implementation plan will definitely be a big part of. So, but we also would like to have your feedback on what the next steps should be. So I would like to ask the last poll, please, and then we will end with some questions and answers if they're available. So please provide your input. When talking about the next steps, here are some ideas. And I saw also a question about the potential other. Oh, there it is. It is part of it. So what should we do? Should we create more awareness? I mean, success will depend on making people aware of this. Should we first help publishers, for example, by means of toolkit, helping them to implement the terminology in article PDFs? Maybe we should do like a collective day, the day of adapting your guide for authors, where we ask all the journals in one day to change the information. It can be a nice marketing event, also promoting the terminology. Extending it to other research objects. Again, we're talking about journal articles, but there are, of course, more objects that are being reviewed, research data, for example, or books. Should we focus on that? There's also a question about language, and I think that was also in the Q&A. Should we focus on language? I think you can have more than one answer, but please take a few seconds to help us define the next steps of the working group. Let's see if we can make the 75% again. Yes. Very good. So let me just read out the results. So if I see well, number 1 and 2 are, first of all, creating more awareness. And I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give their perspective of the next steps also based on this poll. So creating more awareness of the terminology in the scholarly ecosystem as number 1, plus developing a toolkit supporting publishers implementing terminology on article PDFs. Then we have organizing the collective action, translating to other languages also came up frequently, and then last, extend terminology to other research objects. So it seems that we should focus first maybe on the journal articles, and then move to, when we are successful there, move to other research objects. So thank you very much for this feedback. Maybe I'll just go through the panelists and ask them if what their views is on the next step, and if this poll change their minds. Nettie, with your experience of NISO, what do you think the working group should focus on?
I think that the toolkit for adoption would be a tremendous step up. That would assist publishers to implement it, and then that kind of feeds upon itself. When there's more publishers implementing it, other publishers will follow. I think will. So I agree with that vote. If I had to pick one.
Anna?
Yeah, so as a rather talkative person, I would say creating more awareness of the terminology is definitely going to be something I would want to do. Help make sure that we're talking about it with people consistently, bringing it up while we're attending annual meetings or as part of groups that we're part of, and just making sure more and more awareness, because there's always new people coming into the field and there's so much to know about publishing. I think it's hard to know. If you saw this webinar on your second week on the job, it wouldn't mean as much to you as in a year from now. So that's probably what I would vote for.
Thank you. Kim?
My vote would be split between two of these items. I think the toolkit would be really, really useful, especially when we come to look at the article level data that we want to surface, because there's really complicated technology that I don't understand underneath all that. So I think for a number of different publishers, that would be really useful. The other thing that I think would be really useful is that translation to other languages. I think that would be really helpful, especially given how much, at least for us at IOP, how much of our audience is global. While it'll be on our website in English, because our website is English, if they can click through to see an explainer in a language that's more comfortable for them, then that, I think, is another step towards inclusivity. So I would vote for translation as well as a toolkit.
Thank you. I'm just going to the Q&A. So there was one question about the other languages. So yes, that is something we are planning. Tony has a question. Great work. I wonder if there are plans to also make this information machine readable, or if it will be available on the article level, perhaps to also look to deposit this information with Crossref. Yes, that's a very good point, Tony. And actually, that was part of the original intention of this project, is to also make it machine readable, that third parties can ingest this information and display it. We have been piloting with some initiatives that will use this information. For example, tools that will collect information about journals and displaying it to the community. So definitely something that is higher on our list as well. And thank you for addressing that. Maybe a question for Kim. After the implementation of the terminology pilot, have there been significant changes in the submission volume and or author queries regarding journal policy on peer review model?
I don't think we can tie any changes in submission volume to this necessarily, or at least not that we could be that precise about understanding causation. But I would say in terms of author queries, honestly, not really. And I think that's a good thing. We didn't get many author queries about the peer review process anyway. It was something that I think did reasonably well in the first place on our journal website, but if anything, they've gone down. So, and that's the aim, right, is that we spend less time re-explaining ourselves, and that there's information out there for people to read at their leisure. So I would say if anything, the queries have gone down, certainly not up.
Yeah, thank you. And also to mention that several publishers were involved in the pilot, and actually there is a blog post from Wiley that was published yesterday. I don't know if somebody can put it in the chat. But we also did a fairly thorough investigation on the terminology with the editorial community to ask them if it was clear for them. So we have done some surveys and some polls to make sure that it's clear, both to the authors as well as to the reviewers and the editors. All right. I just wanted to give the opportunity for people that put in other. There are two, but if somebody else has any comments or any suggestion for further steps or on the terminology itself, please feel free to ask that question or identify yourself and ask the question. No? Okay, fine. Of course, if you have any further questions or further suggestions, please contact me or contact the working group. As I mentioned, the project is not over. There is the suggestions for next steps and definitely the implementation, which is going to be a big part of our next work. So we're going to have communication about the next steps, and we probably do another meeting, let's say at the end of the year, beginning of next year, explaining you the next steps and how we're going to make sure that this is going to be a standard that makes peer review again more consistently communicated, but also more transparently displayed on the various platforms that are used by academics.
Joris, there is a couple of more comments in the chat.
Yeah. Yes, there's the blog post. There's a question for awareness building. How can we use this to help clarify conversation about open? I am not sure what you mean, but please feel free to clarify yourself, but maybe somebody of the panel can answer this question.
I think that the open is used, as we know from Tony's article, to use so many different things. What this does, it doesn't necessarily explain what that one word means, but it means in which ways your particular publisher or journal applying that term. So I think it's a step forward, but I don't know if the industry will ever agree on one version of what open means. I think what this tool does is it gives us a common language so that we can all converse and understand what each other are talking about, rather than me saying open and Anna interpreting it to mean something else.
Exactly. We try to avoid the word open in the terminology to indeed prevent that confusion.
And I think for me, it falls right in there is open, and also even just the phrase peer review, right? You say it and we all know what it means to us, but what it means to us is very specific to our experience. So additional clarification is always just super important.
Yes, the question from Jen. Great to see this captured in metadata. Absolutely, that is part of the plan. That's also going to be, of course, an important step in ensuring that this will be displayed on the article page and the PDF as well. So again, that is a big part of the ambition we have, but it entails some technical work. So this will not happen overnight, but it's definitely on our roadmap, and we will plan for the implementation. Any more questions so far? All right. Well, thank you very much for attending. Again, this is let's say this is the first step of the next phase, and we're going to need everybody in the community to support us in implementing this. So watch this space. We will come with plans and next steps, and we will let you know when we are ready to communicate that. But again, if you want to join the working groups or join the efforts, please reach out to us, and we will get you involved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.